Tonight, the Toronto International Film Festival forced to cancel screenings over a threat to public safety. The growing controversy surrounding a documentary about Russian soldiers and the unprecedented move now by the festival. A spacewalk for the history books.
From here, Earth sure looks like a perfect world.
A giant step for private space exploration. CBC News speaks to the man who unknowingly bought the stolen portrait of Winston Churchill.
It was a big surprise to me.
From CBC News, this is The National with Christine Berac.
Thanks for joining us. Adrian is away. Threats to public safety have forced Canada's most prominent film festival to make an unprecedented reversal. Screenings of a controversial documentary at the Toronto International Film Festival are now suspended. Russians at War shows the invasion of Ukraine from the point of view of Moscow's troops, made by a Russian-Canadian filmmaker. The backlash from the Ukrainian community has been strong, calling the film propaganda, which the filmmakers deny. Eli Glasner has more on the controversy and the reaction tonight.
The Toronto International Film Festival described Russians at War as a gripping first-person documentary showing Russians in battle for reasons that only become more obscure. Now the premiere, where the director Anastasia Trofimova was to present the film, has been paused. TIFF saying due to significant threats to festival operations and public safety. As the date of the premiere approached, there were already protests and accusations it amounts to propaganda.
There's only one truth. Russia invaded Ukraine.
Members of the Ukrainian community have shared concerns about the director's background and intentions.
Anastasia Trofimova has a history of working for Russian television.
The Russian state media channel RT was banned in Canada in 2022.
The Russian government is known for sowing disinformation and division around the world. The more that they can confuse who the aggressor is and who the victim is, it just fares better for their invasion.
TIFF called us and said, look, the security threats have risen to a certain level, which we do not think it's safe to continue.
The Canadian producers of the film condemn the invasion of Ukraine, but they say they trust the director.
This is not a Russian propaganda film. This is an independent documentary film, an independent Canadian-French documentary film. It was not made in any way by Russian television with the aid of Russian money.
They say the director quit RT in 2020.
She's sort of a one-person band. She goes out there. She's fearless.
But while the filmmakers are calling this suppression an un-Canadian, some question the timing of the film's premiere.
I believe now is not the time to show that film, especially when Ukrainians are being killed daily, civilians are being killed daily.
Speaking to CBC News before the cancellation, the director had this to say.
I had the chance to lift the veil a little bit on the reality of one of the sides that no one, especially Canadians, has heard from for the last 2.5 years. And I would appreciate everyone who is leveling these accusations to, first of all, see the film.
Christine, Toronto police tell me tonight that TIFF organizers decided independently to pause the screening, so not due to any recommendation from the police.
So, Eli, where does this leave the future of this film?
Well, while the Ukrainian community continue to say that this is not the time to show the film, the producers are hoping there will be a screening open to all at a later date.
All right, thanks, Eli. Eli Glasner in Toronto tonight. Turning to a milestone in space exploration, an adventurous billionaire and a SpaceX engineer are now the first people who are not professional astronauts to walk in space. Nicole Murtolaro shows us how they blazed a trail 700 kilometers straight up in more ways than one.
There's SpaceX. Back at home, we all have a lot of work to do, but from here, Earth sure looks like a perfect world.
It was the view of a lifetime as billionaire and philanthropist Jared Isaacman popped his head out of the SpaceX Dragon capsule. He was greeted by a stunning sight. The blue marble, Earth. Shortly after his 10-minute spacewalk, it was SpaceX engineer Sarah Gillis's turn.
Really cool to see one of our own out there. That's awesome.
While only Isaacman and Gillis exited the capsule, 2 other crew members were sitting inside, also exposed to the vacuum of space. This was more than just a chance to view Earth at its finest. It was a test of SpaceX's new spacesuits. This, the first real-world test.
10 or 15 years from now, people will be starting to settle the south pole of the moon, and they'll be wearing the Mark V version of this spacesuit and just counting on it to work perfectly. And it's largely because of what we witnessed today.
This crewed mission has seen many milestones, including traveling the farthest from Earth since the last Apollo mission in 1972. The International Space Station is a mere 400 kilometers above Earth. The 4 astronauts traveled 1,000 kilometers further, beyond the Van Allen belt, an area that shields us from harmful space radiation, and then heading down to 700 kilometers to perform the highest spacewalk ever.
A lot of what we learned during the spacewalk today about how the human body is affected by radiation in high orbits is going to go into how they prepare that vehicle to make sure that NASA and other astronauts are safe going to the moon.
But it's not just about going to the moon. Mars is the ultimate goal.
This is a pretty amazing step, an amazing time to be alive.
So, Christine, this is actually just the first step in the ambitious Polaris program.
First of 3 missions, Nicole, as I understand it?
Right, that's exactly it. The final one will culminate with the first humans taking flight in SpaceX's massive 33-story Starship, which a version of which will be used to return humans to the moon, which is slated for 2026. It might actually get pushed back, though.
It's all just incredible. Nicole, thanks for this.
You're welcome.
New details are emerging about the curious case of the stolen roaring lion, the famous Winston Churchill portrait that was swiped and replaced with a fake, then sold before the world even knew it was missing. David Fraser spoke with the man who unwittingly bought it.
As the world searched for the roaring lion stolen from its Canadian home, Nicola Casalini learned it was actually in his living room.
I discovered that, in fact, I didn't buy a simple copy of the roaring lion, but that copy, the one that Yusuf Karsh gifted to the famous Chateau Laurier.
That portrait of Winston Churchill by celebrated Canadian photographer Yusuf Karsh had finally been found years after it vanished and had been mysteriously replaced with a fake.
I realized that a piece of, not only a piece of art, but a piece of history was hanging in my living room.
A lawyer living in Italy, Casalini bought the portrait through an online auction house. Thinking it was a copy, he paid around $10,000 Canadian for it, including a commission in May 2022. But after a few months, he was contacted by the auction house and told to hold on to the artwork because of an ongoing investigation.
Of course, it was the first time that I was involved in an international case like that.
According to court documents, police have charged 43-year-old Jeffrey Wood for allegedly making a fraudulent copy of the portrait to replace the original. He's expected in an Ottawa courtroom later this month.
Well, it's very unusual that something that's been stolen shows up this quickly. 2 years is not a long time in the stolen art business.
Casalini is happy to return the artwork to its proper owners, and he will be officially handing it over to Canadian authorities in Rome next week.
A piece of that portrait is still mine, at least in my heart, in my memories.
He's also hoping to make a trip here to the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa to see it in its rightful home. David Fraser, CBC News, Ottawa.
In Kingston, Ontario, 2 people are dead and a third is in hospital with life-threatening injuries after an attack at an encampment near a supervised consumption site. Just before 11 this morning, police say they found the victims, 2 men and a woman. Officers then spent hours in a standoff with the alleged attacker. They say he was finally arrested without incident just before 5 p.m. Police are investigating a triple homicide in a town along the border between Saskatchewan and Alberta. As Julia Wong tells us, while people in Lloydminster are in shock, police say there's no risk to the public.
RCMP officers combed through the scene of a crime that has rattled this small community. This home is where the police say they found the bodies of 3 people Wednesday night during a well-being check.
I do understand the concern by the community, but this is not a random incident.
RCMP called the deaths murders, but beyond that, they are not sharing the names, ages, or what the relationship was between the three people. CBC News spoke with people familiar with the home who say a father and his 2 adult sons lived there. Police say, as of Thursday evening, the suspects have not been caught, but residents do not need to worry for their safety.
At this time, it doesn't appear to be a random act. So the general public is, if they're not involved in this type of activity or any types of criminal activity, and I'm not saying these were criminals at all. I don't know the investigation, but generally when it's targeted, there's a reason.
In a city of roughly 12,000 people, the mayor is trying to calm nerves.
We live in a world that things do happen, but in the same token, as I just related, this is not everyday occurrences in Lloydminster, Alberta, Saskatchewan.
Neighbors are shaken.
I was very distraught and upset about what happened to that family.
Lloydminster borders Alberta and Saskatchewan. Mounties from both provinces are involved in the investigation. Autopsies are expected in the coming days. Julia Wong, CBC News, Lloydminster, Saskatchewan.
The threat of an Air Canada pilot strike is growing tonight, and with it, concern over all the flight cancellations that would follow. Peter Cowan now on where negotiations stand, the pressure to reach a deal, and why for some, the damage has already been done.
Most people arriving on the island of Newfoundland do so by air, and the majority fly Air Canada. But now, even before starting their vacation, visitors aren't sure how it'll end.
It's quite worrisome because I'm here and how will I get back? It's a little far to walk.
The union representing pilots can issue a 72-hour strike notice as of Sunday. A lockout notice is also possible. Air Canada says it'll have to start winding down flights in anticipation as early as Friday. A strike would ground all flights by Wednesday. Already, pilots have set up a strike headquarters in Toronto. Wages remain one of the big issues. The pilots are looking for a big increase to close the gap with their American counterparts.
I'm cautiously optimistic. The last week or so seems to have been productive at the negotiating table. As you can see here, we're ready for any eventuality.
But Air Canada is warning the federal government may need to step in if a deal isn't reached.
We have accepted changes to over 70% of the collective bargaining agreement, but we are now faced with unreasonable wage demands that unfortunately we cannot meet.
The tourism industry is also on edge and putting pressure on government.
A labor disruption in air travel won't just leave people stranded, it will ripple through the economy, hitting small business owners who are already struggling to make it.
The best deals happen at the bargaining table.
The federal government is still hoping this will be resolved through negotiation, not arbitration, but some travelers aren't waiting to find out. Back in Newfoundland, hotels are getting an increase in cancellations.
We're not going to be able to get the opportunity to make up this business. So, and for many of us, it's the profit.
Air Canada is letting passengers change their flights for free. If your flight is canceled, Air Canada says you'll get a full refund. Peter Cowan, CBC News, St. John's.
A potentially fatal mosquito-borne virus is now being linked to a death in Ontario. Jennifer Yoon explains what we know about its presence in Canada, why cases may be going unnoticed, and why some experts say that needs to change.
A rare virus that spreads from mosquitoes to humans, now confirmed in Canada. Public health officials say a lab test confirms an Ottawa resident died after being infected with Eastern equine encephalitis in August. It's the first known case in this country in years.
There's no question that once it reaches the brain, it's very serious. It's a very serious illness, and your chances are about 1 in 3 of dying.
Most of the time, the symptoms are common, like fever, headache, and vomiting, that clear up after a week or two. But it can be catastrophic, including neurological symptoms and even death. There's no known cure and no vaccine for humans.
Wherever that mosquito has a footprint in North America, that's where EEE risk resides.
There have only been a handful of reported cases in Canada, but public health agencies aren't required to monitor it, which experts say can skew the numbers.
Certainly, the number of cases of Eastern equine encephalitis, just like the number of cases of West Nile virus encephalitis, are underreported.
In the U.S. Northeast, there have been 8 confirmed cases this summer and at least 1 death. Vermont's health department urged residents in some towns to stay inside between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. Experts say what's happening in the U.S. could be a taste of what's coming our way.
It's only a matter of time until we get more cases.
Warnings like that leading a push for change in Canada.
I don't think to date it's been necessary to have a separate EEE surveillance program, but I would say within the next 5 to 10 years, we probably will have one.
Avoiding mosquito bites is the best way to avoid the infection, say experts. But the good news, once the first frost arrives, the mosquito population will die off, along with the threat, at least until next summer. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
The cleanup is now underway in Louisiana. Hurricane Francine slammed into the state, bringing fierce winds and flash flooding. The Category 2 storm downed trees and cut power to hundreds of thousands of people. Drone footage shows the dramatic aftermath. Entire neighborhoods underwater. Francine has since weakened to a tropical depression, but flood warnings are still in effect as the system heads north. Donald Trump says he will not take part in a third presidential debate, despite calls for a rematch from Kamala Harris. Richard Madden now with what that means for both candidates as they fight to flip key swing states.
Vice President Kamala Harris targeting North Carolina, where a new batch of polls show her slightly ahead in this key battleground.
Are you ready to make your voices heard? Do we believe in freedom?
Harris, working to build momentum after Tuesday's presidential debate, has been aggressively pushing for a round 2.
2 nights ago, Donald Trump and I had our first debate. And I believe we owe it to the voters to have another debate.
But former President Donald Trump now says that will not happen, telling supporters in must-win Arizona he's already squared off against outgoing President Joe Biden and claims he also won Tuesday's debate against Harris.
Polls clearly show that I won the debate against Comrade Kamala Harris. So because we've done 2 debates and because they were successful, there will be no third debate.
Trump continues to push the bogus conspiracy of Haitian immigrants eating pets in the small town of Springfield, Ohio. And the Arizona GOP is now leaning into it, posting signs around his campaign stops. But that rhetoric is having consequences. This morning, workers at Springfield City Hall were evacuated after a bomb threat, and some residents in that community say they fear for their safety.
No, they are not eating cats. And as our government said, dogs. We haven't seen one account of that.
And less than 2 months before Election Day, the U.S. Secret Service is now preparing for what happens after. For the first time, it's designated January 6th as a national security event, deploying more protective measures in and around the Capitol. Richard Madden, CBC News, Washington.
An Ontario man is speaking out after a hospital shaved his deeply religious father-in-law's beard without consent.
Hey, what happened here?
Now the family is looking for answers.
This is a very serious cultural violation. This is not just ethics, it's the law.
Escort for the cutter! The calls to change an iconic British uniform that uses an animal killed in Canada.
Tradition is no excuse for cruelty.
And a dramatic rescue amid a hurricane, all caught on video.
I just didn't want him to go under or anything.
We're back in 2. Musician Jon Bon Jovi and his team are being praised for talking a woman in distress off the ledge of a bridge. This surveillance video shows the singer and a member of his team approaching the woman in blue towards the left of your screen there. She's standing on the ledge while holding onto the railing. After speaking with her for about a minute, The pair pulled the woman back over to the walkway before Bon Jovi gives her a hug. Local media say the band frontman and his team were on the bridge to film a music video. The family of an elderly Sikh man is demanding answers tonight from an Ontario hospital. His beard was shaved off while he laid unconscious, despite explicit instructions not to do so. Dale Manukduk tells us how the family is pushing back against this violation of his faith.
The family of this Sikh man is shocked.
There was no medical purpose.
His beard is gone. They say it was shaved off without consent.
I'm just still trying to figure out when he wakes up, if they put a mirror in front of him, how he's going to react.
Jashiv Dhaliwal is the son-in-law of 85-year-old Joginder Singh Kaler, who in late July fell down the stairs.
Any bone that we could think of was damaged. He was not conscious.
Kaler was taken to St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, where he was treated for a month and then transferred to Brampton Civic, closer to his family. 2 weeks ago, the hospital asked permission to shave his facial hair, to which the family said no. The next day, Kaler was clean-shaven.
The doctor, he basically said that, hey, you know, that's not his department, that's up to the nurses. So he brushed it off.
Sikh men never shave their facial hair as part of their faith.
This is a very serious cultural violation. This is not just ethics, it's the law. If you don't have consent, you cannot do anything. The Canada Health Act is very clear in this country. You must have consent for absolutely everything.
William Osler Health System, which operates Brampton Civic, would not comment on an individual case due to patient privacy. In a statement, the hospital says, in part, we are sorry and deeply concerned when we do not meet the standard our patients and their families expect and deserve. Also respects the religious rights and freedoms of all Canadians.
They could have sent us that a week ago. I never would have called the lawyer.
The family contacted the World Sikh Organization. Its president issued a statement writing, given that Brampton is home to the largest Sikh population in Canada, it is inconceivable that such disregard for Sikh faith practices could occur at Brampton Civic Hospital. William Osler tells CBC Toronto it's investigating and conducting a comprehensive review of this case. Dale Manukduk, CBC News, Caledon, Ontario.
There is renewed scrutiny tonight surrounding the uniform worn by the King's Guard.
I feel like we're killing an animal unnecessarily.
Why some say the controversial fur is still ideal. And Rosie is here with that issue.
Hey, Christine, Parliament, as you know, resumes in just a few days, but the dynamic has really changed.
So if you're pulling out, you have to vote non-confidence.
With the Liberal NDP deal now over, what can we expect this political season? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more. Why not?
King Charles got a surprise embrace from the New Zealand women's rugby team during a visit to Buckingham Palace. The hug happened after one of the team members suggested it, and you just heard there the response from the King. A hug? Why not? The New Zealand squad plays the English women's team later this week. Well, the King's Guards are being called on again to do away with their real fur caps made from Canadian bears. As Chris Brown tells us, the soaring new cost has reignited the push to leave the traditional headgear in the past.
Escort for the cutter! The red tunics of the King's Guard are eye-catching, but it's the big bearskin caps that make their uniforms truly distinct. For years, animal rights groups have used cruelty arguments to try to get Britain to ditch the hats. Now they're making an economic case, with Britain's Defence Ministry confirming soaring replacement costs of £2,000 or $3,500 Canadian per hat. The bearskin caps come from bears killed in Canada, bears that can be hunted legally in every province and territory. Animal rights groups say one bear gets you one hat. PETA UK's Jennifer White says more humane alternatives that are also cheaper are available.
Tradition is no excuse for cruelty, and the British public don't want the caps to be made from the skins of animals. You know, it just falls out of line with where we're at in modern times.
Order.
A petition made it to Britain's parliament 2 years ago, but the then Conservative government said the faux fur alternatives weren't functional enough.
And bear in mind that the guardsmen we're talking about have to wear this often in cold weather, often very wet weather, for long periods of time.
In a statement, Britain's Ministry of Defence said the bears are not hunted to order, and reductions in the number of bear skins procured will not reduce the number of bears being hunted. Canada's ceremonial guards wear bearskin hats too, and the Defence Department says it strives to maintain existing hats so as to avoid ordering new ones.
Like most famous British things, the bearskin hat is not British.
Outside St. James's Palace, visitors were divided.
I feel like we're killing an animal unnecessarily. Use fake fur.
If the bear's dead either way,
I didn't know.
Who cares?
Activists hope they may have allies in the King and Queen. Camilla has reportedly already told PETA she won't be buying any more fur. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Now let's break down the week in politics. Rosie is here with that issue.
At issue, the House of Commons returns Monday with Pierre Poilievre challenging the Bloc and NDP to force an election.
If you're pulling out, you have to vote non-confidence.
But the NDP says it will take no advice from the Conservatives.
Anything that happens in Parliament will be based on is it in the best interest of Canadians.
So what can we expect from a new, exciting dynamic inside the House of Commons? It might be. And are Canadians ready for the return of this precarious minority government, the days of old? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight on At Issue. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. I am actually excited for the return of the House of Commons. I think that's a good sign that I still enjoy my job. But Andrew, what are you expecting when we all see these new dynamics next week?
Well, we're in the shadow of a number of external events. You know, the breakup of the Liberal NDP agreement, the resignation of the Liberal National Campaign Director, the coming by-elections in Elmont-Transcona and La Salle-Mervardon, and generally overhanging it a sense of impending doom, I guess, on the Liberals' part. So you see all the parties kind of, including Liberals, kind of maneuvering in that context. The Conservatives and the NDP almost seem to be looking past the Liberals. They're taking more shots at each other these days than they are at the Liberals. I don't actually think we're into any kind of countdown to an election, I think. The NDP had no intention of bringing the Liberals down while they were in the agreement, and they have no more intention of bringing them down now that they're out of the agreement. All that's changed is instead of having an agreement that they can point to and say, well, we're not going to bring them down because of that. Now they're going to have to come up with a fresh set of excuses for each situation. So that won't be too pleasant for them. But other than that, you know, it's maybe a bit more of an opening for the Bloc to wheel and deal, and maybe they'll get some offers from the Liberals or not. But other than that, I don't think it's that changed because of the decline of the deal.
Chantal, what do you think? I mean, just the fact that it is not as stable, whether the confidence votes happen quickly or we don't get to an election, the fact that it is not as stable is a change.
I actually will quarrel with the notion that it's not as stable because nothing prevented Mr. Singh from tearing up the agreement on the morning of any vote over the past 2 years.
Yep.
Yes.
As we saw. I would also argue that a lot of the stuff we've seen over the past 2 weeks, in there, I include the tearing up of the agreement by the NDP, but also Mr. Poilievre's two similar news conferences saying he was going to have a confidence vote and daring the NDP in English and the Bloc in French to defeat the government, were driven in large part by Monday's by-elections. And the attempt by both the Conservatives and the NDP to score points with voters. The NDP hopes to hang on to a seat in Winnipeg. The Conservatives want that seat. The Montreal battle is on. But I don't think we're going to be going into an election between now and November, put it this way. And I'll remind you again that there is no reason for anything to be a confidence vote between now and the end of the year.
And we'll talk more about the by-elections after the next break. But Althea, you were at the Liberal caucus over the past number of days, and I wonder whether anyone you talk to there feels like things have shifted a little bit for them.
A little, on several fronts. I will say
I think a lot of what we're hearing, the messaging that we're hearing at the moment, is actually about Monday's by-elections. I think they're quite significant. Beyond that, though, I think the next few weeks and months are going to be pretty exciting in Parliament because errors are always possible. And we are going to be reading in between the lines every single little thing, policy change or position change from every single political party. Two things coming out of the Liberal caucus, I would say. One, the party may not sound like it behind, through the cover of anonymous sources, but internally, they seem to be a little bit more united than they were going into that caucus. Yep. I think you're going to see, instead of people calling for the Prime Minister's head next Wednesday, if they lose the by-election in Montreal, you'll see people decide that they're just not going to run again. Yep. That's where that discussion is going to happen. The other thing, though, is that there is a new drive, if you will, like the people who are staying around because they genuinely believe or they have convinced themselves that they can hang on to their own seat if there is a blue wave, but they want to see change. And the party has told them, you're going to see change. We're going to do more government advertising. We're going to tell people the wonderful things that we have done so that when we tell them Pierre Poilievre's going to take them away, they'll actually feel that that something is being taken away from them. So there is a new strategy on the Liberal side, and there's a new leadership angle as well that I think it was not quite as present as it was, it is not manifesting itself in the same way as it was last year.
The faces of our colleagues here, as you spoke about, this was quite something. So, Andrew, I won't even prompt you, and then I'll get you, Chantal, you in as well.
Well, it's never a good sign that a government is really plugged into what's going on out there if it thinks the problem is just it hasn't bought enough ads or hasn't been strenuous enough in telling Canadians all the great things it's been doing. I would suggest their problems are much more deep-seated than that. I think the smart people in the party know that, but the smart people in the party may be the ones who are getting out.
Chantal?
How can I beat that line? Almost impossible. Listen, whatever pleasant air was being, taken in by the Liberal caucus in BC, a place where they don't have much of a dog in the provincial fight, they will get a reality check from real voters on Monday.
Yeah.
So that is one. And if they need to sober up before then, they might look at two polls that came out over the past week since the NDP walked away from the Liberals. Both polls devastating for both the Liberals and the NDP. And Ipsos and Léger, if you're looking for the authors of the polls, the breakdown, the regional breakdowns are devastating with the Conservatives, and both polls match with the Conservatives at 51% in Ontario. I don't think I've seen polls as bad, region by region, since Brian Mulroney had to deal with the Bloc Québécois and the Reform Party. Yeah. And Justin Trudeau doesn't even have that as an issue. And by the way, both polls had the Bloc Québécois with a solid lead at 34% in Quebec.
Conservatives now have in several polls a larger share of the vote than the Liberals and the NDP combined. And I'm trying to remember when that was last the case in an election.
Sure, but probably not when I was around, to be honest. Althea, so let's talk a little bit about the Conservatives then. Like the way Pierre Poilievre is playing this, and I think you're right. It's mostly about the by-elections on Monday, but broadly the fact that he's trying to, taunt the other parties to come along for the ride. What do you make of how he's trying to control that part of the story?
It's interesting that he's framing it around the language of a carbon tax election because he tried this earlier in the spring. He brought forward a motion calling for a carbon tax election, and both the NDP and the Bloc at the time in the spring voted with the Liberals because they supported a carbon price. It's not clear, as we're recording this, that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is so on board anymore with this idea of a carbon price. So perhaps the NDP will change their positioning and then it will only be the Bloc Québécois that votes with the Liberals. But the thing that nobody says that is clearly obvious is both Jagmeet Singh and Yves-François Blanchet, the leaders of the NDP and the Bloc, would much rather have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau than Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre, especially if Pierre Poilievre is a majority government. At least they can get some stuff. And that is the angle that we're sure to hear from the Bloc, and that we may hear or may not hear, depending on whether or not the Liberals are willing to give basically spend more money to make Mr. Blanchet happy, or if they're willing to compromise on a few principles to make Mr. Blanchet happy.
Last word to Chantal. I'll just point out that today Premier Eby in BC also put forward the idea that he didn't want an individual carbon tax anymore there too. But Chantal, last word to you on
well, yes, he wouldn't want it if there was no longer a requirement by the federal government for provinces to put a price on carbon, which I think has also to do with the provincial campaign ongoing. The carbon pricing scheme in BC was never an election issue because both the Liberals and the NDP supported the concept. Now, as for Mr. Singh and carbon pricing, the NDP wants more attention. Well, it's bound to get some. And today, Mr. Singh hinted rather vaguely that he didn't like the way that carbon pricing worked under the Liberals because it put too much of a burden on consumers. I'm curious to know how people who are getting refunds are getting too much of a bargain, and with system the NDP has found that will not filter down to consumers by shifting the balance to industry. But that's just me because it's very cloudy as a position.
See, these are the exciting new dynamics that we're going to have next week. I'm trying to get you all excited about it. Okay, well, we're going to leave that there. When we come back, we will talk about those by-elections, as everyone agrees, pretty critical ones, one in Montreal and one in Winnipeg.
People have an important choice in these by-elections. In La Salle et Verdun, people have a choice to say no to Liberals who've taken you for granted.
They're happening this coming Monday. What's at stake for the parties in terms of who wins, who loses, and what that might change? That's next. At issue, 2 by-elections this Monday. Must win for the Liberals in one and the NDP in the other. Both have been on the offensive.
The answer the Conservatives are bringing forward is, oh no, we'll create growth and opportunities through cutting programs Canadians are relying on.
People have an important choice in these by-elections. In La Salle et Verdun, people have a choice to say no to Liberals who've taken you for granted.
So what is at stake for the parties and what will it mean for this newly precarious government? Let's bring back everybody, Chantal, Althea, and Andrew. So, I mean, we could go through all the scenarios, but it's the Liberals and the NDP, obviously, who hold one of each seats. And if they lose, I think there's problems. Who ends up with the most problems, do you think here, Althea, if either of those parties lose their seat?
The NDP. The NDP's current offer is we are the option for change. We are the progressive option for change. If they cannot hold on to their seat in Winnipeg and the Conservatives take it from them, then, you know, what confidence does that give voters elsewhere that they should vote for the NDP and that can be the alternative to Pierre Poilievre? Similar in La Salle et Verdun, where this is a longtime Liberal stronghold, where half the riding was actually represented by former Prime Minister Paul Martin. If the NDP is not the one to steal it from the Liberals, if it's the Bloc Québécois, for example, again, it goes to that narrative that they've been trying to drill into us for the last 2 weeks, that they want to be the option for change. So if they lose both of these ridings, I think that is not good at all. I had originally thought, I'm not even sure if I said it on this program or not, that this would be a bad sign for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, that the caucus meeting the Wednesday following the Monday by-election would be tense. I no longer believe that to be true after talking to a lot of caucus members in Nanaimo. He's not going anywhere. And it doesn't matter how many voices may line up at the microphone, Prime Minister is not going anywhere. And nobody wants to put their neck out. And even though they all say it, he's not going anywywhere. So even if they lose by 25 points, I think he'll still be there.
Okay, so what do you make of that, Chantal? I think you mentioned last week, too, that you thought it was a real test for the NDP. But are they the ones, you know, is that the storyline the next day, or is it about the government? Or is the damage so done that we just expect them to lose at this point?
The sheer fact that the NDP and the Liberals are in tight races and expect close results in seats that should be solid in both cases means that whatever the outcome, the message has already been sent that these are weakened parties who will be bringing a really weak hand to an election if one should take place anytime soon. Now, the NDP, I mean, Jagmeet Singh has lost ground in 21 of 22 by-elections since he became leader of the NDP. If he can't hold on to that Winnipeg seat, there is no way that with a straight face he can continue to say we are the stronger alternative to block Pierre Poilievre from winning government. Worst case scenario in La Salle, Aymar, Verdun would be for the Bloc to win and the NDP to finish third, because that would mean that having put all those resources in a riding where they did have a shot at 20% in the last election, they couldn't even beat the Liberals for second place. So, yeah, I think the stakes are pretty high for Mr. Singh, but I don't believe you can get away, notwithstanding Justin Trudeau's contention that he's staying, you can't get away from the fact that losing a second seat in Montreal after having lost one in Toronto is almost a mortal blow to the moral authority that Mr. Trudeau may still have over his caucus.
I agree with Althea, though. I talked to or texted various MPs who were at the caucus, and they did not come out depressed. In fact, some of them were reassured, was a word that was used. I don't know what the by-election results will change, but for good or for bad, they seem to have accepted where they are, Andrew.
I think that sounds a whole lot more like resignation to me than unity or hope.
Yeah.
But, you know, resignation is certainly part of the healing process. Look, without taking anything away from what Chantal was saying, there nevertheless is a difference between a close victory and a loss. If the Liberals had won Toronto St. Paul's, but it had been a narrow thing, that would have been bad, but it wouldn't have been as bad in the way these things are scored as losing the riding.
Right.
That being said, I think there's a decent chance that both the NDP and the Liberals hold on to these ridings. I think the NDP has the better shot in Aylmer-Transcona because it's a two-way race. And that riding has tended to be pretty solidly NDP. They've got Wab Canoes, coattails that might help. You know, there's really just a straight-up fight with the Conservatives. So if they lose, then that's so much the worse. In La Salle-Aymar, what the Liberals may have going for them, I mean, the Bloc seems to be leading the polls, but it is a three-way race. And when it's that kind of race, it's really on a knife edge. You know, that's why they lost in Toronto St. Paul's, was all of the anti-Liberal vote had coalesced around the Conservatives. The NDP vote collapsed. It doesn't seem to have happened in La Salle-Aymar, and so they might squeeze through and get lucky.
Chantal, do you want in on that part?
No, except to note some fairly traditional fault lines that we have forgotten over the past decade, and it is that when two Federalist parties are fighting each other in Montreal, the Sovereigntist Party tends to do better.
Come up the middle, yeah. Last 30 seconds to you, Althea.
I just think it's, you know, maybe one thing we will be talking about next Thursday is whether or not Jagmeet Singh should stay. If he loses both of these ridings, are there knives out in his party? Because there's a lot of unpopular, I mean, I'm in BC at the moment, a lot of unhappy BC NDPers who actually showed up, interestingly enough to me, at the Liberal caucus meeting because they want federal Liberals to vote provincially NDP in the next election, but also because they tell me they really don't like Jagmeet Singh. And there are a lot of people in caucus who also kind of feel that way. So, you know, is that a topic of conversation we will be having? As opposed to the Liberals, I do think that there are other problems that the by-election in La Salle-Aymar exposes. The fault line on the Israel-Gaza war is a big topic of discussion among MPs, especially MPs in the GTA, and also just how election ready the party is. You know, if they lose rather by just a small margin, then a lot of questions need to be asked about the party infrastructure, because that Toronto St. Paul by-election, it was winnable.
You nailed that 30 seconds. That is incredible. I'm sending you a gold star. Well done. Thank you all for this. We'll have lots to talk about next week. Thanks very much. With that, I'll send things back to Christine in Toronto.
Next, a driver gets trapped as Hurricane Francine slams into Louisiana.
I just want to make sure that he was safe and brought him to shore.
The heroic rescue caught on camera in our moment. A scary scene in New Orleans as Hurricane Francine pummeled Louisiana. One man found himself in deep trouble as roads quickly flooded and his truck started to sink. Luckily, a good Samaritan took matters into his own hands, and a news team was right there to capture it all. Tonight, the rescue on live TV makes our moment.
that person is still stuck in that vehicle right now. I know this is what we stress about when you have these situations, but here we are with a possible rescue situation happening right now live on television.
I just didn't want him to go under or anything, so I just wanted to make sure that he was safe and brought him to shore. I went and checked it out, saw that there was a guy in there and the water was steadily rising, so I ran back to my house, grabbed a hammer, ran back, and just went in there and got him.
We're talking about a pickup truck, a big pickup truck that's submerged at the canal underpass. We can see that person look like they're climbing out of the back seat right now. You can see most of that man's body is out right now. That Good Samaritan, oh my goodness, he just fell in the water. That Good Samaritan's helping.
I'm an ER nurse at University Medical Center, and we do this every day, so it's no big. I mean, I guess it is a big deal, but it's nothing out of the ordinary, so to speak.
This is a Good Samaritan right here.
Just grabbed a hammer. Well, thank goodness he acted fast. About 10 minutes after the rescue, the pickup was fully underwater. Now, you heard the Good Samaritan say he's an ER nurse. He actually cut his hand during the rescue, bandaged himself up and said, no big deal, but really a pretty big deal. Thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Christine Burak. Take care.